I still remember the exact words my daughter used. "You will either serve my husband or you will get out of this house." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The way she said it was calm, practiced, final. Like she had already rehearsed the outcome in her head and was just waiting for me to play my part. I stood there in my own living room, grocery bags cutting into my fingers, the smell of bread and milk still clinging to the air, and realized something had quietly died. This wasn't anger. This was entitlement. Her husband lounged in my chair, the leather recliner my late wife had bought for me before cancer took her. His feet up, beer in hand, eyes glued to the television. He didn't even look at me when he spoke. He just assumed. Assumed I would obey. Assumed I would bend. Assumed I would stay. They were waiting for me to argue, to beg, to apologize for existing in my own home. Instead, I smiled. Not a bitter smile, not a sarcastic one, just a calm, measured smile. The kind you give when a decision has already been made and nothing else needs to be said. "All right," I said quietly. "I'll pack." The look on their faces was almost comical. Shock, confusion, a flicker of fear. That wasn't part of the script. I was supposed to crumble. I always did. I was supposed to fold like I had every other time. But this time, something was different. I walked down the hallway without another word. The hardwood floors creaked beneath my feet, the same floors my wife and I had refinished together 20 years earlier. I pulled my old suitcase from the closet, the one we'd bought for our honeymoon, and placed it on the bed. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I packed only what I needed. Behind me, I could hear hushed voices, whispers, calculations. They were already trying to figure out how to control the situation they'd just lost. When I rolled the suitcase out the front door, neither of them stopped me. No apology, no goodbye. They didn't think they needed one. In their minds, it'd be back. I always came back. The motel room was small, cheap, quiet in a way my house hadn't been in years. I set the suitcase down and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the blank wall. For the first time in a long time, no one needed anything from me. That night, I didn't cry. I opened my laptop instead. 1 week later, my phone showed 22 missed calls. They were just getting started, and so was I. I didn't wake up one day and decide to be generous. I became generous, one quiet sacrifice at a time. For 32 years, I worked in banking, not the glamorous kind you see in movies. No corner offices with glass walls or 7-figure bonuses. I started as a junior account clerk and climbed slowly, deliberately. I showed up every morning at 7:30, left most nights after 600, and took pride in doing things the right way. Numbers balanced. Clients treated fairly. Promises kept. That discipline followed me home. When my daughter Tiffany was accepted into a private college out of state, the tuition letter arrived folded neatly in an envelope I opened at the kitchen table. $40,000 a year. 4 years. $160,000 total. I stared at that number for a long time. I could have said no. I could have insisted she attend a state school. But she cried. She told me this was her dream, and I told myself this was what fathers did. So I worked more. I took on extra accounts, reviewed loan files at night, gave up vacations. I drove my old Buick long after my colleagues upgraded, wore the same suits until the cuffs frayed, and told myself that comfort could wait. My daughter's future could not. I never asked her to thank me. I never reminded her what it cost. Then came the wedding. Tiffany wanted everything to be perfect. The venue, the flowers, the dress, the photographs. Her fiancé's family couldn't afford their half, so I quietly covered the difference. $25,000. One check. No complaints, no speeches. Just another withdrawal from a lifetime of discipline. I stood at the back of the reception that night watching her dance, proud and exhausted, telling myself it was worth it, that this was the last big expense, that once she was married, she and her husband would stand on their own. I was wrong. 2 years later, they wanted a house. Prices were high, interest rates worse. They didn't have enough for a down payment. I did. $80,000 from my retirement savings, money I had planned to live on when my knees finally gave out and my hands started shaking. I told myself it was temporary, a loan in spirit, even if not on paper. The payments never stopped. $1,200 a month for the mortgage, $300 for utilities, $500 for groceries when things were tight. I paid their car insurance, covered repairs, picked up credit card balances without asking questions I didn't want answers to. Meanwhile, I lived on Social Security. My check came in every month, and most of it went right back out. I learned to stretch meals, learned which expenses could wait, learned to say, "I'm fine," when people asked how retirement was treating me. I told myself I was needed. What I didn't realize was that being needed had slowly turned into being used. Somewhere along the way, respect disappeared. It didn't vanish all at once. It eroded. Small comments at first, a sigh when I spoke, a look exchanged between my daughter and her husband when I questioned an expense. I ignored it. I didn't want conflict. I told myself families go through phases. But generosity without boundaries teaches the wrong lesson. It teaches people that money appears because they want it to, that someone else will always clean up the mess, that gratitude is optional. I paid for my daughter's education. I paid for her wedding. I paid for her house. I paid for her comfort. And somewhere in all of that, she stopped seeing me as a father and started seeing me as infrastructure, invisible, replaceable, silent. By the time she gave me that ultimatum in my own living room, she genuinely believed the house was hers, that the money was theirs, that my presence was conditional. That belief didn't come from nowhere. I built it. The decline didn't announce itself. It crept in quietly, disguised as small inconveniences and passing moods. At first, it was tone. My son-in-law would ask for things the way you ask a dog, not a man. Grab me a drink. Move your car. Can you handle this real quick? Always phrased like a favor, always delivered like an expectation. When I hesitated, even for a second, it'd catch that look on his face. Irritation, disbelief, as if my hesitation itself was an insult. I told myself not to read too much into it. Then came the jokes, little remarks at dinner, comments about how slow I moved, how outdated my opinions were, how times had changed. My daughter would laugh along, not cruelly, but not kindly either. She never corrected him, never said, "That's my father." Silence became her way of choosing sides. I noticed birthdays started getting forgotten. Invitations stopped coming. Sunday dinners turned into takeout, eaten in front of the television, with me hovering at the edges of conversations I wasn't meant to join. When I spoke, they nodded politely and kept scrolling on their phones. I was present, but no longer included. Money requests changed too. It wasn't, "Can you help us?" anymore. It was, "We need this." It was, "Just put it on your card." It was, "You don't really need the money anyway." That last one stuck with me. I remember standing in the kitchen one evening, washing dishes while they sat at the table, discussing a weekend trip they were planning. Hotels, restaurants, entertainment, all of it assumed. None of it paid for by them. I asked calmly how they were budgeting for it. My son-in-law laughed. "Relax, we've got it handled." Handled meant me. The worst part wasn't the disrespect. It was how quickly I normalized it. I told myself I was old-fashioned, that younger generations spoke differently, that this was just how marriages work now. I made excuses for behavior I would never have tolerated from a stranger. But they weren't strangers. That's what made it hurt. The house began to feel different, too. Doors closed more often. Conversations lowered when I entered a room. I was careful where I sat, careful what I touched, careful not to get in the way. I found myself timing my movements so I wouldn't interrupt their routines. I had become a guest in a home I owned. There was one moment I can't forget. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through mail, when my daughter walked in and asked me to move. Not because she needed the chair, because she didn't want to walk around me. The way she said it wasn't angry. It was worse. It was casual, as if my inconvenience was self-evident. I moved. Later that night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of their laughter from the living room. Something settled in my chest then. Not rage, not sadness, clarity. I realized I had been confusing love with tolerance. I thought enduring disrespect was part of being a father. I believed sacrifice was proof of devotion. But sacrifice without limits doesn't build gratitude. It builds expectation. And expectation turns into entitlement. By the time the final confrontation came, the words didn't shock me. They confirmed what I had been refusing to see. The foundation had already crumbled. All that remained was the moment when they finally said out loud what their actions had been saying for years, that I was useful but optional. The moment didn't explode. It crystallized. I had just come back from the grocery store. Milk, bread, a few things on sale. Nothing extravagant. The bags were heavy, cutting into my fingers as I pushed the front door open with my shoulder, already thinking about putting everything away before sitting down to rest. That was when I saw him. My son-in-law was sprawled in my chair, not just sitting, occupying it. Shoes off, feet up, a beer dangling loosely from his hand like the house existed solely for his comfort. The television was loud, something about sports, money, winners. He didn't look at me. "Grab me another beer," he said. Not please, not when you get a chance, a command. I paused. Not out of defiance, out of disbelief. "Excuse me?" I said. He sighed dramatically, finally turning his head as if I'd interrupted something important. "You heard me, from the fridge, not the cheap stuff." I set the grocery bags down slowly. My hands were shaking, but my voice wasn't. "I just walked in," I said. "I need to put these away." That's when he stood up. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. He had youth, height, and the confidence of someone who had never been told no. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell alcohol on his breath. "Look," he said, lowering his voice like he was explaining something simple to a child. "You live here, because we allow you to. You want things to stay peaceful? You do what I ask. No attitude. That was when my daughter appeared in the doorway. She took in the scene in seconds. Me standing still. Him looming. The tension thick enough to choke on. I waited. I truly did. I waited for her to say my name, to say, Dad, to tell him to back off. Instead, she looked at me with irritation. Dad, she said, just get him the beer. Why are you making this into a problem? Something in my chest went cold. This is my house, I said evenly. Her response came without hesitation. No, she said, it's our house now. She stepped beside her husband, close enough that their shoulders touched. A united front. Me on one side, them on the other. You need to decide, she continued. Either you help my husband and stop causing tension, or you pack your things and leave. There it was. No raised voices, no drama, just a clean, brutal ultimatum delivered by the child I had sacrificed everything for. I searched her face for hesitation, for regret, for anything that suggested she didn't mean it. I found nothing. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't about a beer. This wasn't about respect. This was about control. They believed the house was theirs. The money was theirs. I was a leftover obligation they tolerated as long as I stayed useful and silent. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't remind her of the tuition, the wedding, the mortgage, the years of quiet support. I simply nodded. All right, I said. I'll pack. The shock on their faces was immediate. Confusion, panic, a flicker of fear. They hadn't planned for this outcome. I turned and walked down the hallway without looking back. Every step felt heavier and lighter at the same time. Heavy with memory, light with certainty. By the time I closed the suitcase, the betrayal had already done its work. They thought they had won. They had no idea the game had just begun. The motel room smelled faintly of old coffee and disinfectant. The furniture was cheap. The walls were thin. But for the first time in years, no one was watching me. No one needed anything from me. No one was waiting to see how much more I would give. I sat at the small table by the window and opened my laptop. That was the moment everything shifted. Numbers have always calmed me. They don't lie. They don't manipulate. They don't raise their voices or issue ultimatums. They just tell the truth, if you're willing to look. I logged into my accounts slowly, deliberately. Checking, savings, retirement, automatic payments. Scrolling down the screen like a quiet confession. Mortgage transfers, insurance premiums, credit card balances I didn't recognize but had been paying without question. This wasn't generosity anymore. This was exploitation. I pulled out my notebook and started writing. Dates, amounts, patterns. 5 years of support condensed into a single, undeniable reality. I hadn't been helping my daughter get on her feet. I had been holding her up so she never had to stand, and her husband knew it. That realization hurt more than the ultimatum. I made my first call that night. James had worked with me years ago, back when we were both younger and less careful with our trust. He answered on the third ring. "Richard," he said, surprised, "everything all right?" "I need clarity," I told him, "and I need it from someone who understands money, not excuses." I explained the situation calmly. No emotion, just facts. By the time I finished, there was silence on the line. "You're doing the right thing," he finally said, "but you need to protect yourself, financially and legally." That word, legally, settled something in my chest. The next morning, I called Mark. Mark had handled my estate planning years earlier. A careful man, precise, the kind of lawyer who listened more than he spoke. "I need to review everything," I told him, "not to punish anyone, to understand where I still have control." He didn't ask why. When we met later that week, he laid the documents out across his desk like evidence in a case that had been building for years without my consent. "You're still the owner," he said plainly. "The house, the accounts, the policies. You didn't give those away. You allowed access." Access. That word explained everything. "You can revoke it," he continued, "any time. No drama, no confrontation, just paperwork." I felt something I hadn't felt since my wife passed away. Relief. Then came the discovery that changed how I saw my son-in-law forever. A call from an old colleague, quiet, careful. "Richard," he said, "this is off the record, but your daughter's husband tried to take out a loan against your house months ago. Claimed partial ownership." The room went cold. "He forged documents," my colleague continued. "We caught it, rejected the application, flagged it internally." I thanked him and ended the call, my hands resting flat on the table. This wasn't arrogance. This wasn't disrespect. This was theft. The beer, the commands, the ultimatum, none of it had been spontaneous. It was conditioning, testing boundaries, pushing to see how much control he could take before I noticed. And my daughter had stood beside him. That night I didn't sleep. I organized instead. I gathered statements, printed confirmations, made lists. When the anger came, I didn't fight it. I let it sharpen me. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming ownership of my life. I wasn't alone anymore. I had allies, quiet ones, professionals, people who understood systems and consequences. And for the first time since retirement, I felt something that surprised me. Not bitterness, clarity. I didn't confront them. I didn't warn them. I didn't announce anything. I simply stopped feeding the machine. The first change was the easiest. I canceled the automatic mortgage payment. One phone call, polite confirmation, no emotion. 5 years of quiet obedience ended with a reference number and a recorded voice telling me the request had been processed. Next came insurance. 2 vehicles on my policy. Cars I never drove. Premiums I paid every month without thinking because it was simpler that way. I removed both vehicles effective immediately. The agent asked if I wanted to notify the other drivers. "No," I said, "they'll notice." Credit cards followed. 3 accounts, my name, my liability, their spending. I revoked authorized access with practiced efficiency. New charges would be declined. Existing balances would remain my responsibility, but no more damage would be done. Each call lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. By noon, the financial umbilical cord was cut. They didn't know yet. That was the beauty of it. I sat in the motel room afterward, staring at the confirmation numbers written neatly in my notebook. Everything I had done was legal, ethical, quiet. No raised voices, no dramatic exits, just boundaries enforced through systems that didn't care about guilt or manipulation. That afternoon, I took the next step. I visited the courthouse. The building was old, solid, built to last. much like the rules inside it. I filed a formal notice establishing sole occupancy rights to my property. I didn't need to evict yet, not officially, but I wanted the clock to start. Documentation mattered. Paper trails mattered. On the way back, I made another call. A private investigator, a woman ID worked with years ago when I was still in banking. Smart, discreet, thorough. I don't need dirt, I told her. I need truth. She understood immediately. 2 days later, the picture was complete. Gambling debts, not small ones, not recreational, the kind that compound quietly until panic replaces confidence. Creditors calling, accounts shuffled, lies layered on top of lies. The arrogance suddenly made sense. My son-in-law wasn't powerful. He was desperate. And desperate people mistake silence for weakness. I didn't tell my daughter any of this. I didn't need to. Reality was about to introduce itself in ways I couldn't soften even if I wanted to. By the third day, the first cracks appeared. A missed mortgage payment, a declined card, an insurance notice. Small disruptions that felt catastrophic when you'd built your life on borrowed stability. My phone lit up. I didn't answer. I let the silence do the talking. Every hour without my response forced them to think, to scramble, to argue with each other instead of leaning on me. That was the trap. Not punishment, independence. I wasn't pulling the rug out from under them. I was stepping off it. That night I slept better than I had in years, because for the first time the consequences they were about to face were not mine to manage. They didn't fall apart right away. At first they doubled down. My son-in-law reacted exactly the way desperate men with fragile egos always do, getting louder, by telling his version of the story before anyone could hear mine. He started making rounds through town, talking to anyone who would listen. At the hardware store, outside the bank, in line at the coffee shop. According to him, I was unstable, confused, an old man losing his grip on reality. He told people I had abandoned them without warning, that I had promised to take care of them forever and then changed my mind out of spite. He said my daughter was pregnant and that stress might cost her the baby if I didn't come to my senses. He didn't know how dangerous that lie was, because lies invite scrutiny, and scrutiny is something small towns specialize in. I heard about it slowly at first. A former coworker pulling me aside, a neighbor calling to check in, a pastor asking careful questions. People didn't accuse me. They observed, compared notes. They remembered who I was long before I became the villain in my son-in-law's story. And his arrogance grew. He believed volume could replace credibility, that confidence could overpower history, that if he spoke forcefully enough, the truth would retreat. Then he made his mistake. He tried to turn me into a spectacle. One afternoon, I ran into him outside the bank. He was already mid-performance, voice raised, face flushed, gathering a small crowd of sympathetic listeners. I approached calmly. I didn't interrupt him at first. I waited until he saw me. "There he is," he snapped, pointing, "the man who kicked out his own family." I didn't raise my voice. "How are the gambling debts going?" I asked. The effect was immediate. His face drained of color. Conversations around us stopped. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else pulled out a phone. He stammered, denied, tried to regain control, but the ground beneath him had already cracked. $18,000, I added quietly. Poker tables, casino records. That's a lot of money to lose while someone else pays your mortgage. The crowd didn't need proof. They needed consistency, and his story had just collided with reality. After that, things unraveled quickly. Creditors started showing up. Not dramatically, just professionally. Clipboards, calm voices, questions my daughter didn't know how to answer. Insurance notices arrived, bills with unfamiliar urgency. Consequences don't shout, they knock. His job didn't last long either. Reputation matters in small businesses. When customers started whispering about gambling debts and forged documents, his employer did the math. I got the call before he did. "We're letting him go," the manager said. "Too much risk." That night, the shouting began. Neighbors heard it. Doors slammed. Accusations flew. My daughter called me, panicked, confused, finally seeing the man she had defended without question. But he still believed he could win. He filed complaints, threatened lawsuits, even tried to accuse me of financial abuse, hoping authority might do what intimidation no longer could. Every attempt failed. Paper trails don't bend to tantrums. And through it all, I said nothing publicly. I didn't need to. Arrogance is a gift. It convinces people they are untouchable, right up until the moment they aren't. My son-in-law thought the world worked the way he did, loud, forceful, transactional. He never understood systems, or patience, or what happens when a man he thought was weak finally stops holding everything together. The collapse didn't arrive all at once. It came in envelopes, official ones. The first knock came early on a weekday morning. A uniform, a clipboard, a calm voice explaining missed payments and required follow-up. By the time my daughter opened the door, the situation had already moved beyond conversation. That was the moment she finally understood something I had known for weeks. Systems don't negotiate. Bills don't care about intentions. Banks don't respond to tears. And consequences don't pause because someone is going through a hard time. Her calls started coming in rapid succession after that, confused at first, then panicked. "The mortgage didn't go through," she said. "They're asking for the full amount." I listened without interrupting. "Our cards aren't working. The insurance company says coverage lapsed. Dad, something is wrong." "Yes," I said calmly, "something is." I didn't explain. I didn't lecture. I let reality speak for itself. That afternoon, the second hammer fell. A deputy delivered papers. Not eviction yet, just notice. Legal language, timelines, options closing instead of opening. My daughter's name was on the document, but so was mine. Ownership clarified, occupancy defined. Lines drawn in ink instead of emotion. By evening, my son-in-law lost control completely. He started throwing things, yelling at neighbors, calling people who had already stopped answering. His confidence evaporated, replaced by raw panic. Men like him don't fear judgment. They fear exposure. And exposure was coming. Creditors followed. Not dramatic ones, professional ones. They asked questions, requested documentation, took notes. Each visit peeled away another layer of the illusion he had built. Then came the restraining order. It wasn't revenge, it was protection. The threats had escalated. Witnesses existed. Evidence was documented. The process was quick, efficient, final. He was legally prohibited from coming near me or my property. The irony was almost poetic. After years of trying to control me under my own roof, he couldn't step within 500 feet of it without risking arrest. That night, I drove past the house for the first time since leaving. Lights were on, curtains drawn, tension visible even from the street. I didn't feel triumph. I felt confirmation. Everything I had suspected was now undeniable. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't stress. This was a man who had built his life on borrowed money, borrowed authority, and borrowed respect, and all of it had just been reclaimed. My phone buzzed with one final message from an unfamiliar number. This isn't over. I forwarded it to the police and turned my phone off, because when the hammer drops, the only thing left is gravity. When the structure finally gave way, it wasn't dramatic. It was desperate. My daughter called me late that night. Not angry, not demanding, just exhausted. "He's packing," she said. "I don't know where he's going." I said nothing. Through the receiver, I could hear chaos in the background, drawers slamming, objects being shoved into boxes without care, the sound of a man abandoning a sinking ship, grabbing whatever he could carry and leaving the rest behind. "He says, 'There's nothing left here,'" she continued, "that everyone turned against him, that this town is poison." I closed my eyes. Men like him never see consequences as the result of their actions. They see them as betrayal by the world. The next morning, neighbors confirmed it. His truck was gone. No goodbye, no explanation, no plan, just disappearance. Creditors arrived to an empty driveway, a job he no longer had, a reputation already burned beyond repair. My daughter was left standing in the wreckage. When we finally sat across from each other, she looked smaller, older. The certainty she once carried was gone, replaced by something fragile and unfamiliar. "I didn't know," she said quietly, "about the debts, about the forged paperwork, about the casino." "I know," I replied. "That's why this hurts." I laid the documents out on the table. Statements, notices, reports. Nothing exaggerated, nothing softened, just facts. She read them slowly, one by one, watching the image of her marriage collapse in ink and numbers. "He told me he was working late," she whispered, "that he was building something for us." "He was," I said, "just not with his own money." The realization didn't come with tears at first. It came with silence. Long, hollow silence. The kind that follows when excuses run out and truth finally takes their place. Then she cried. Not loudly, not theatrically, just the quiet, breaking kind. The sound of someone mourning not just a relationship, but the version of herself that believed in it. "I chose him over you," she said. "I let him talk to you like that. I watched it happen." "Yes," I said, "you did." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't comfort her either. This wasn't the moment for relief. This was the moment for ownership. "I thought you'd always be there," she continued. "That no matter what we did, you'd fix it." "That's the lie I helped you believe," I said, "and that's why this ends now." She looked up at me, fear and hope tangled together. "What happens to us?" she asked. "That depends on what you're willing to do next," I answered. "Running didn't save him. Hiding won't save you." The town already knew the truth by then. Not because I spread it, because reality has a way of surfacing when enough people compare notes. The sympathy shifted. The whispers stopped being about me. They were about him, about debts, about gambling, about arrogance, about how quickly a man collapses when he can no longer take. My daughter filed for divorce 2 days later. No spectacle, no announcement, just paperwork. Quiet, final, necessary. I watched her sign the documents without hesitation. The collapse was complete. Not because I destroyed anything, but because I finally stopped holding it together. 3 months later, I stood in front of the house again. It didn't feel like mine anymore. And that was the point. The paperwork was finished. The renovations were complete. The old family home, once filled with entitlement, arguments, and quiet resentment, had been transformed into transitional housing for veterans. 3 families moved in that week, men and women who understood sacrifice without expectation, who knew what it meant to give without demanding control in return. Watching them carry boxes through the front door, I felt something settle inside me. Closure. I no longer lived out of a suitcase or a motel room. I bought a small cabin by the lake. Nothing extravagant, just enough space for peace. Morning coffee on the deck. Quiet afternoons with a book. Evenings where the silence felt earned instead of lonely. For the first time in years, my money stayed where it belonged, with me. My daughter didn't disappear. She did something harder. She stood up in church one Sunday morning and told the truth. Numbers, facts, apologies without excuses. The town listened, not because she was humiliated, but because she was honest. She filed for divorce the same week. Therapy followed. Accountability followed. Distance followed too. And that distance was necessary. Reconciliation isn't built on guilt or nostalgia. It's built on change. Months later, she asked me to meet her for coffee. Not to ask for help, not to fix anything, just to talk. That mattered. We don't pretend everything is fine. We don't rewrite history. We move slowly, carefully, like 2 adults learning a new language, one built on boundaries instead of obligation. As for her husband, I hear things occasionally. Different towns, different jobs, same patterns. People like him don't change when they lose money. They change when they lose excuses. Some never do. I don't check anymore, because revenge was never the goal. Freedom was. If there's one lesson this chapter of my life carved into me, it's this. Kindness without boundaries is weakness. Generosity without respect is self-betrayal. And love does not require silence. I didn't lose my family. I lost an illusion, and what I gained was far more valuable. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on where your generosity ends and your self-respect begins. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might help someone else find the courage to draw their own line. Thank you for listening.